good to talk to you.
Yeah, you do.
One of the first interviews that I remember doing for Chronicle was a press stop in London. That was our first leg of the Chronicle press tour, and it was with HeyUGuys.
Oh, cool. Oh, well, we followed your career ever since. We're big fans, so that's good.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Talking about, you're saying that it sort of split people down the middle. I'm definitely in the positive camp. I really enjoyed this film. I think for me, the thing I sort of took from it is I just haven't seen something quite like it for a long time, and it had a real atmosphere to it. What compelled you to sort of tell this particular story? I mean, obviously it's a bit, I'm sure you've sort of spoken about this before, but just what was the sort of jumping off point? What was it about Al Capone and this specific part of his life that really inspired you as a storyteller?
Well, my answer is pretty annoyingly self-indulgent. I never set out to make an Al Capone movie. That wasn't on my bucket list. It came out of my head during a time in my life after my last movie bombed about 5 years ago. There's a lot of complicated stuff that went around that, a lot of personal drama on my end, and I was basically spending my months after the film came out just sitting alone in my backyard. I guess you would say dwelling on what felt like my glory days, which were just right behind me. I had a very lucky early success in Hollywood that skyrocketed me into all of these big categories of movies. And so I got to experience a lot at a high level very quickly for a period of about 4 or 5 years. And then it all came crashing down. So while I was sitting there just reflecting and thinking and having just like this innate sadness and depression that was just overwhelming me, from just feeling like I had lost everything that that I had gained from my first film. I just started to think about Al Capone and, you know, the years after he was released from Alcatraz, what it would have felt like for him sitting in his backyard, just left to think about his glory days, or what kind of ideas were swirling around in his mind, what kind of trauma from those days that were so far removed from his present reality. So I just started writing this script, first out of just a cathartic need to address issues that I was feeling inside of myself. And then it just became this great creative process of writing a film that stylistically never leaves the confines of a dying Al Capone's experience in his house. It just, to me, felt like I had never seen a movie like that before. Naturally, I was just waking up in the morning with new ideas. I didn't outline anything, and I just kept writing. So it was, for me, it was the best creative process that I've ever had writing anything. And yeah, I just followed my heart with it.
Because, I mean, obviously, you've been very open and sort of vocal about your experiences and on the Fantastic Four and sort of what happened after that. But now Capone is sort of coming out, and now you're so sort of proud of the project you've created. Do you have any regrets about everything that's sort of gone on? Would you change anything if you could go back? Or do you think now, because it's all led to this moment, do you actually think you almost needed to go through the Fantastic Four experience?
I don't regret anything because I can't change anything. So it would be just a waste of my energy to sit around and, you know, to fantasize about building a time machine, because I can't. So I can only accept the past and look into all the choices that I made as just being choices that I had to make for whatever reason at that time, which led me to here. So I think in life I think it's within your choice if you are going to be happy with your life and what you're doing with your life. I mean, if I wasn't happy with what I was doing right now, it's within my means, like, as a physically able-bodied person, to just like get up and go try and do something else. But you know, I had the best experience of my life making Capone with Tom Hardy and with the entire cast and the crew, and worked with a lot of people who I worked with on my prior films who came aboard. And so it was overall, if I had not gone through what I did, and if I had not made the choices in making that movie that I had made, I wouldn't end up in this situation. And I couldn't be more proud of anything than this film. So
you mentioned obviously about this specific period, what it was that appealed to you, but I was just wondering about how much you had available to you about this part of Al Capone's life. I mean, it felt like a sort of almost quite an intimate part that no one's. So I'm just wondering about how much, if you had any kind of reference points to kind of help build this kind of and paint a picture of this specific part of that man's life.
There wasn't any like consistent narrative or book or document that covered those final years. There's just a lot of bits and pieces of information that are floating around out there. So, but enough that one could connect the dots speculatively, and in this case, impressionistically, because that was the vibe of this movie for me from the beginning as I was writing it, because like I said, it was coming also from a lot of my own feelings that I was putting into it. It's a piece of impressionism. So, the original title of the film was Fonzo. The name changed to Capone only in the last, I think like 2 months ago, for marketing purposes that at first I had a really hard time accepting. It was a great trade-off because I ended up being able to get my final cut, which is what I wanted. But my feeling about the movie is that, if you call it Capone, it's going to lead to a false expectation of what you're about to see. Whereas a movie called Fonzo, personally, I just love the name. And also, you're going into it, and it's more of once you understand that this is Al Capone, once you're already into a movie called Fonzo, the Al Capone aspect of it isn't distracting you from the goal of the film, which is, here's an impressionistic window into the final days of this wealthy patriarchal figure and his family around him, and these nightmares that are living with him from moment to moment. So, so as far as writing a movie where, if this was a straight up biopic, there would be a different level of, it's not a different level, it's like a parallel, it's a parallel version of responsibility, where if you're writing something that is purporting to be 100% fact, you want to keep true to that. With this, it's a film about the experience of dementia from the POV of an individual who has lost grasp of their identity, and is being haunted by the memories of what living in that identity came with.
Because I mean, and I mean this as a compliment, but it's kind of, the film's uncommercial, I think, and I think it's almost like quite admirably uncommercial. Do you think it's important that people go into it aware of that, so to know what type of film they're going in for?
Yeah, I mean, probably good for them to know that it's a movie that is not very commercial. In a lot of ways, it's purposefully off-putting. I think because I love movies that are like that, I don't think of it like, hey, just warning ahead to everybody. But a lot of things that I definitely read in reviews where people were trying to figure out, like, well, wait, is this intentional? Because I don't think in mainstream movies, like, this is a movie that is installed into a mainstream awareness, but the movie itself is anything but mainstream in its style and approach. And when you accept the fact that you're watching a movie that is not a mainstream movie, you can engage it on those terms. So if it's off-putting, that something's up. There's a reason for this. You can see in the opening credits of the movie that I wrote it, I directed it, and I edited it. I went for a very, very specific vibe and a very specific pacing. So sure, if but simultaneously, I think what's also good about the fact that the movie is called Capone and that it has been installed into this mainstream awareness is that I think a lot of people are watching this movie that might not have watched this movie if it was called Fonzo. And for that reason, you've got people who are giving a more uncommercial artistic film a chance. So I wouldn't go out there saying like, hey, if you don't like stuff like this, just go on to something else. I think everybody should be open-minded. I mean, that's, what the goal of art is at the end of the day. Like when you go into a museum, you've got, different kinds of art in a museum. Or in a history museum, you have different pieces of history. The idea is that you walk around, you take it all in. So I hope that everybody would not just give it a chance, but also be able to just kind of unscrew their expectations a little bit of what they want it to be. Because that's something I'm not trying to give anybody something that they think they want or that they have already seen before and just want more of it. It's a very different kind of movie.
And I think another thing that will get people into the theatres or get people sort of watching it online will be Tom Hardy. Obviously, that's just
Right.
a big name. He's exceptional in the film. I'm just wondering to what extent is his kind of method, because I mean he's obviously one of those actors who when you see him in something you feel like he's given 100% to something completely. I was just wondering what it's like having him on set. If just when you sort of shouted cut, did he go back to being Tom Hardy from London, or did he keep up the kind of bravado of Al Capone just throughout the whole kind of shoot?
It's an interesting thing because I think because of Tom's acting style on screen, you'd assume that he's like a method actor, but he's the opposite in every way. He's not a method actor. He's very much can just turn it on and turn it off in a way that is pretty surreal and remarkable to see him do, because he has this control over like every cell in his body and all and every muscle in his body. He can contort and change and morph himself physically into something else, and then he can just go back to himself like right away. And it's cool and inspiring because you realize that you're in collaboration with somebody who is effortlessly talented enough to go right to where you want them to go without the repercussions of him going there. So it was a joy working with him. I had so much fun. He's very, very, very inviting into his process and open. It was a phenomenal. I learned so much from that experience of somebody being that open on that level of talent. Because a lot of people, a lot of actors have a hard time with that, and which is something that I also respect too, which is sort of like, okay, this is my process, I'm going to keep it to myself kind of a thing. But I don't know, I just maybe chalk it up to just years of experience and confidence in knowing what he can pull off and knowing where he wants to go, that he was as open and giving with all of us, everybody on set. I mean, every time he'd travel in from hair and makeup, like everybody was just so excited for the energy because he's so fun and nice, and by the end of the first week, we all kind of looked at each other, and the sentiment was like, we be worried that we're having too much fun? It was a lot of hard work. It was a lot of very, very, very long days. We were on a tight schedule for for a smaller movie, it made sense. I mean, we were on about a 35-day schedule. But, so we had to work, we had to overcompensate with certain days. We had one full-blown over 24-hour day, which I feel like you kind of have to have one of those in a shoot. brings everybody close together. Everybody gets paid overtime, so it's fine.
As long as it's not the press day, then I agree.
Yeah, right, exactly. But yeah, no, I mean, it was, yeah, it was funny. Like, I you know, two guys like me and Tom, like, I don't know, you probably assume like, oh man, it'd be like really intense, but I don't know. We just had a lot of fun. It was a cool experience. I've become very, very close to everybody we shot the movie with, and we've all in the last few weeks just been texting with each other, like memories of the shoot. It was just a lot of fun.
Yeah, because I was wondering about the challenge of balancing and the kind of there's levels of sympathy for the character, because naturally when you're dealing with a character who's kind of in their later years, someone who's suffering with dementia, it's you can't not have empathy for that role. It's just a natural kind of, I think, reaction as an audience member to feel sorry for the person and take some pity on that person. But obviously, Al Capone has done some reprehensible things in his life. I'm just wondering about that balance of making him a very sympathetic lead character, but always keeping him at arm's length from the distance, so we do have that emotional disconnect at the same time.
I mean, it came straight out of it all came straight out of the script. So the journey itself, it came out of the script and the supporting cast. So for instance, with Tom's performance, we went very decidedly on a sort of like this fine balance between kind of almost satirical and hyperbolic to very grounded and to very grounded and realistic. So there was a lot that he was doing with that character throughout the movie, but being surrounded by Linda Cardellini and Noel Fisher, Kyle MacLachlan, Al Sapienza, Catherine Narducci, Gino, Caffarelli, like their performances and their characters were so earthed in the real, just they came from the earth. They're surrounding him with this balance. So we're able to, if for instance, Tom's character in the middle of the movie is just so vacant and gone from reality, what we're seeing hopefully is the reflection of him in Linda Cardellini's eyes, which is where our sympathy is being projected. So it's not necessarily, in moments where you come to grips with the fact that this is a person who's done terrible things to other people, we know that from the very beginning of the movie that there's this whole family that doesn't know him like that at all. They just know him as a father or a brother or a husband, grandfather, uncle. So that's where all of that came from.
You mentioned obviously the sort of writing, directing, and editing. I was just wondering how, firstly, it's a sort of two-part question, how important it was for you on this project, off the back of a kind of big blockbuster with a big studio, where I'm assuming there's sort of a slightly less control over the whole artistic side of things. How important it was that you had your all of those kind of credits. And secondly, do you think going forward, your sort of next projects, do you want to have that same sort of control in every kind of area, or are you quite open to directing from someone else's screenplay or writing for somebody else for your next project, for example?
As for the future, I mean, I just want to kind of keep it organic and open-minded. I love, more than anything in the world, making movies. It's what I wake up in the morning for. It's all I want to do. It's all I think about. So I wouldn't want to limit myself to a specific mode of operation. But with this movie, there wasn't like a bunch of huddles that we had to have where I'd have to remind anybody, like, look, I need to be in control of this. I wrote the script, and if you're a writer director, if you've written the script that you're directing, right off the bat, there's a different level, especially if you're not already like maybe a big name brand director or something like that. Like if you wrote the script and you're on set directing it, everybody knows where to, who to ask the questions to, whether it's about character or design or anything like that. So your your vision is the most necessary thing for the entire film to operate, just as that filmmaker. And same goes for the fact if you didn't have anything to do with the script at all, like that is essentially what your job is. In terms of me needing to also edit it, I just, like I said, there's a very, very, very specific pacing and approach that was important to me with this film that in a lot of ways I felt were going to be harder to communicate, less intuitive than, you know, with like a normal job of editing a movie. And I needed to really explore this film as something that came from such a personal, really, really deep place inside of my soul. So when I got into pre-production and when I started meeting with the actors and I told them like that I was going to be editing the film, it wasn't the reaction was a relief. Like, okay, well, that makes things easier. You know, like, oh, we're on set. All right, well, we don't need to, because if you're on a set and you have an editor, like normal thing, like there's questions for the editor, like, and notes that need to be written. And, you know, okay, well, let's make sure we have 3 more takes of this just in case. But since it was just me, and since I've edited movies before that have been in theaters, there was nobody questioned it.
I was just wondering too, talking about sort of writing the screenplay, a lot of the words that Tom has to say is kind of like gibberish. And I was just wondering if you had to write down just in those moments gibberish, or if it was almost quite structured, what he would say in those times, or if you just let him have free reign and just kind of roll with it.
I don't know. You know, I've been talking about this with some friends. I think we all, you know, that meme that was going around where everybody sees like it's either purple or it's yellow.
Oh yeah.
I think it's the same thing with Tom Hardy's voice, because I, like, for instance, when I saw Dark Knight Rises or anything that Tom is in, I've never had a problem understanding anything that he says. Whereas I know a lot of people I know are defiantly like, I had no idea what he was saying. I think it's just like what you're hearing. I don't know. I think like further into the movie, post stroke, spoiler alert. He suffers a stroke. There's probably lines that I'm more just know in my head because I wrote the lines. So if I'm hearing it, it's because I know what it is. But yeah, I mean, no, it was everything was written as as English or Italian, is the best answer.
Because I love the there was something I just love the kind of idea of, I think The Irishman does this kind of similar thing of this idea of taking people right at the end of their life when they're quite vulnerable. You know, these people that have been sort of these feared gangsters and mobsters who have kind of been capable of so much, and yet we're meeting them and dealing with them at a time when they're quite fragile and they're not this figure they once were. I was particularly interested in that, in the fact of just being Al Capone. I was just wondering about this figure, this Al Capone, why his name stands out above all the others. What is it about him that lends itself so much to that, to kind of being such a sort of a staple of kind of cinema? And also how important, and how much do you kind of enjoy looking at the theme of kind of nostalgia and the idea of someone kind of looking back over their life?
I think his iconography is Al Capone, and why there have been so many movies is he was the first modern king of organized crime. I mean, he was the first, he was our early 20th century El Chapo. Like, he was just that, you know, he ran America pretty much. I mean, as far as the illicit side of the earth was concerned, from in a certain time period during the 20s and the early 30s, he was on top in a way that nobody else before him was, unless they were an elected official or a king or an emperor. So the power that he took for himself in his rise in the criminal underworld, and the and the enterprise that he created out of that he built from that in such a massive, sophisticated, organized way, and how much money he made was unlike anybody before him in that same in that same sort of, I guess, occupation. So at that time, and for years after, there's just, how could you not have a fascination with him, especially from a cinematic standpoint or a fictional standpoint? I mean, his life and his personality and who he was inspired so many different characters. And I hear a lot of people saying that there have been so many Al Capone movies. There really haven't been. I've only seen a few from decades ago. He's been a character in some things before, but mostly we just know him. We associate with him. I don't know how much, like, really young people, but at least for me, I associate him with Edward G. Robinson caricature that, you know, he played in so many different films in that kind of way. So
it's quite rare to speak to a filmmaker like yourself who is so kind of open about their kind of previous projects and stuff like that. I mean, the way you speak about your experience on the Fantastic Four and stuff is quite unique in filmmaking. You don't often have directors come out and just sort of say, take ownership over something, just go, yeah, maybe that didn't work for me, or that wasn't what I wanted it to be, for example. I'm just wondering about how important it is for you as a filmmaker to be honest and to be able to look back and just say, that project didn't work, and that's okay. You know, it's not all, it's all right to look back, and not everything has to be a writer's success. Is that something that you think is quite important for yourself, to be able to have that perspective?
yeah, because I've already tried that other approach before that is kind of makes sense, where if you got your foot in the door and you're in the big studio system, you're a director, it's scary. It's the idea, you don't want to let anybody think that you have any flaws. You know, you don't want to hint at any sort of drama. I mean, look, there's definitely positives in being political, in terms of sometimes it's not necessary to talk about things that aren't necessary to talk about. Like, I think there's a difference between being honest and transparent and then just being a blab, you know, and just talking about everything at every moment, which I think is sort of like a social media thing, you know, like, you know, every day, like in your own, you know, in your job, in anybody's job, like, we're all dealing with some sort of a challenge, or something isn't completely right or the way we want it to be when we go to work every single day. It's the same thing in show business or in making movies. Like, you're dealing with all of this stuff that you're trying to, you know, get the best possible results. But I think maybe, I don't know if it's a combination of like just the self-image obsession that comes from Hollywood, or what. But again, like, I know what that's like to be more transfixed on portraying a self-image of, like, you know, nothing could possibly fall apart and I'm perfect, because you're afraid. You don't want people to think like, oh, there's, you know, yeah. I mean, it's so much easier to just be honest. I mean, if you're honest, you don't have to remember what the story is that you're trying to portray to other people. That creates more anxiety than anything. If you're just like keeping up appearances and keeping up an image and walking into things and being like, oh yeah, no, everything is absolutely perfect, and then that one perfect, and I love all these people, and it's just like, but it's okay if you didn't love all those people. You don't have to disrespect any of those people, but, you know, sometimes things just don't work out, and it's on you to sort of like just continually work on your own self-awareness and know what works best for you and who are the best people for you to work with. And I think that goes into any line of work. It doesn't just, it's not just Hollywood. I think it's a good idea to always be honest, no matter what, you know, and not be afraid of if that's gonna like either get you in trouble or if people are gonna perceive weakness in you or something. Like, it's so much better to just own whatever your weaknesses are, because I think people are gonna believe in you a lot more, especially if you're making a movie. If you're the difference on Capone, on the set of Fonzo, that was an experience where I already felt like there was so much of this bad reputation that had been created by the press from Fantastic Four that, like, to me, I was like, well, like, what would even be the point of trying to be anything less than just a normal human being with flaws like everybody else? Like, what am I going to do? Like, pretend that I'm better than everybody? I mean, it's ridiculous. So
Yeah,
that's my answer.
Cool. Well, I really admire what you've done with Capone. I think it's a fascinating film.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much.
I'm really looking forward to. I'm just looking forward to seeing it come out over here. And I mean, to be honest with you, who knows when it could come out? If they wait long enough, it could end up getting released in the theaters, over here. So
right,
we'll have to see how it
we'll
goes.
See. Yeah, I'm waiting to find out. I'll try and get some answers soon.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Josh.
Thank you.
And hopefully by the time you do your next one, we'll be able to do an interview in real life, in person.
Definitely. Definitely.
Right. Cool. Thanks.
All right. Bye. Thank you so much.
Ladies and gentlemen, you're watching Hey You Guys.
Hey You Guys, huh?
Hey You Guys.
Is that from the Goonies?
It is indeed, yeah.
Nice.
Hey